What's happening, Packer fans? Welcome into the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Great show lined up for you today. First of all, before we kind of kick off our main topic, of course, the big news from Monday was the expected news from Monday, and that's that Aaron Rodgers will, in fact, not be at mandatory minicamps. This was always sort of expected to be the case over the course of the last few weeks. Nothing at this point would have probably changed any of the current circumstances between the Packers and Aaron Rodgers. Could kind of get the hints of it over the weekend with Mark Murphy that this is something that they're still working on. Listen, from a timeline standpoint here, closer to training camp or right when training camp breaks, that's when this is going to pump into high gear. And right now, from a Rodgers-Packers standpoint, the only thing that is going to potentially fix this is it's going to take some time, and it's going to have both sides really working together to try to work this out. If that's something that Aaron Rodgers is even interested in, we just don't totally know at this point. But as training camp inches closer and as we get into training camp, that's for both sides where things really start to ramp up. If you're Aaron Rodgers and you want to trade to another team at that point and you say, hey, I'm dug in, I'm not playing for the Packers, you start to put more pressure on the Packers to say, hey, we need to figure out a trade. I am not playing in Green Bay and I'm still going to be an NFL player. Like, you need to trade me. And you might say, like, hey, he's under contract and you can force him to sit and things like that. And yes, there is a potential of that, but the undercurrent of that, of what happens in that situation, is it lives with you for the remainder of the season. If he's just sitting at home and he's still under contract but not reporting, it poisons training camp, it poisons the season. And even if he's, unless he retires, which I don't foresee happening in any way, shape, or form, unless he retires and it's just done, like, it continues to poison the outcome of your season. And it just does. Like, it's a constant question. The players are wondering what's going to happen. And I just don't think that you can survive that undercurrent of that kind of going on in the background while you're trying to survive a grueling 17-game season. And, from another Packer standpoint, I think at some point you have to wonder, all right, do we pull the trigger and see what you can get in return for that type of player? And from an Aaron Rodgers standpoint, again, you're starting to say, hey, if I'm going to play for another team, I need to get on that team so I can start learning that playbook and learning those players and everything, because that stuff takes an incredible amount of time. Even a full training camp probably isn't enough to pull that together. So I think when we start getting closer to that time, I think the pressure amps up. And going back to my point previously where there would be pressure on the Packers, if Rodgers said, I'm not playing for Green Bay and I'm not retiring, I think even the NFL, and we may not like to think that maybe this happens, but the NFL gets involved and says, hey, you guys need to trade Aaron Rodgers. We cannot have one of our top 5 players in the NFL sitting on the sideline for a season after a pandemic. We need ratings here. Like, that's not an option. And I think for everyone, right, for the Packers, it makes no sense for Aaron Rodgers to sit out or retire or be on the sidelines. They need to either have him playing or get something in return. For Aaron Rodgers, it makes no sense to be retired or sitting out or being on the sideline. It makes every sense in the world to be playing football. For the NFL, it makes sense for him to be playing football. For the fans, I'm not talking Packer fans, I'm talking NFL fans, it makes sense for Aaron Rodgers to be playing football in one way or the other. So as we get closer and closer to the season and specifically training camp, all of this is going to start boiling up and the pressure is going to start building on both sides to figure out some conclusion or resolution, regardless of what that is. So minicamp, not a surprise. This was expected from the moment that we kind of heard that this was all going down. As we get closer to training camp, that's when things will start ratcheting up. So mostly expected on Monday. The good news, however, is that the wide receivers are going to be reporting. And it sounds like there doesn't seem to be any sort of other issue of players not reporting. It sounds like everyone's going to be there, save for Aaron Rodgers, when minicamp breaks and when the media is there on Tuesday. And that may not seem like a big deal. That might seem like the expected outcome. But if all of a sudden the receivers were sort of colluding is a strong and wrong word here. I'm not saying colluding, but trying to maybe take Aaron Rodgers' side and say, hey, we're not coming until things get figured out with Aaron Rodgers, or if they're upset with the franchise or if there's more decay going on underneath things where it's not just Aaron Rodgers that's upset with the Packers, it's multiple Green Bay Packers and they're doing something about it, specifically if that player is Davante Adams and he says, hey, I'm out as well. Like I want a new contract, or I want this thing with Aaron figured out, or I want out of here. Like, this could have gone very poorly, very fast. And I think, again, this was always expected. I don't think there was any rumblings that Adams or the receivers weren't going to show up to this portion. But if it were the opposite and if it were flipped, we're having a totally different discussion of there are major problems in Green Bay. And it's not just Aaron Rodgers, Brian Gutekunst. It is multiple players now, including Rodgers, Davante Adams, etc. Like, that would be a major, major talking point and change in this entire discussion. So, good news, the receivers are reporting, and again, it may have seemed like a foregone conclusion, and hopefully it always was, and there was no issues there. That's what it seems like, and again, thankfully, the no story here is sort of a story in the fact that I think Green Bay could have avoided a much bigger mess on their hands, and it doesn't seem like there's more decay going on underneath things than just right now Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers. So that is a very good sign. All right, enough about start of minicamp. I will be there on Tuesday, so I will keep you posted with my observations tomorrow. Cheap plug, make sure to subscribe if you have not already, so you can make sure to check that out. But let's get into the main topic. And as we sort of kick off now the mandatory portion of minicamp, and we're in the midst of the offseason, not quite training camp yet, of course. We've got about a month and a half before that starts. But I wanted to go over the players that I think this is a make or break offseason for the Green Bay Packers, and just kind of run through these for a variety of different reasons. The players are each make or break seasons for a variety of different reasons, I should say. So let's start with running back. And I think Dexter Williams is the prime example here. 6th round pick, hasn't been able to really get on the field, was buried on the depth chart behind Jamal Williams, A.J. Dillon, Aaron Jones a season ago. And even like Tyler Ervin is on the roster. Like, he just could not get on the field. Now all of a sudden, Jamal Williams is gone, Tyler Ervin is gone. That number 3 running back spot seems totally up for grabs. But spoiler alert, when I get into my Kylan Hill breakdown, I love Kylan Hill and what I think he can bring to the table. I am shocked that guy was not, at worst, a 4th round pick. The fact Green Bay got him in the 7th round, I haven't finished watching him yet, so I'll hold judgment entirely. Maybe he looks terrible in the last few games that I watch or something, but holy crap, that kid can play football, and I am incredibly excited about, especially where they got him as a 7th round pick. Do not get that whatsoever. So I still think this is a very important offseason. And you've still got guys like Mike Weber and Patrick Taylor that are fighting for that spot as well. I'm very intrigued to see Patrick Taylor as well. So to me, probably one spot between, I think Mike Weber is on the outside looking in. You never know what's going to happen. But I think Patrick Taylor, Dexter Williams, Kylan Hill fighting for 1, maybe 2 spots. But I think this is a massive offseason for Dexter Williams. And it sounds like he's very much in the heat of that number 3 running back position. So good for him. Let's see if he can continue that. But definitely a make or break offseason for him. At wide receiver, I'm going to say Devin Funchess and Equinemius St. Brown. And I'm not going to go every position here, but EQ and Devin Funchess. I think there's a very strong chance, and I've said this before, that there's one roster spot for either EQ or Devin Funchess. I think, obviously, Davante Adams, Allen Lazard, MVS, Amari Rodgers are 4 of your spots. And then I think there's a strong chance that you don't keep both EQ and Devin Funchess. I think you can keep one of those guys, but that number 6 wide receiver spot may need to be either a younger guy, more developmental, but more importantly, a special teams guy, somebody that can maybe be a gunner on special teams or, whatever the case may be, but somebody who can make a little bit more of an impact there. And I don't think either EQ or Devin Funchess is going to be that guy. So I think you have your 4 sort of locks to make the roster. And then I think potentially one spot for either EQ or Devin Funchess. It's certainly within the realm of possibility they could keep both, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if they only kept one of them. Devin Funchess out of football basically for 2 full seasons. Was with the Colts 2 seasons ago, had the injury week 1, out the rest of the season, opts out, not at OTAs. Now he's in here for minicamp. This is a major, major time for Devin Funchess to kind of get back in the swing of things and show what he can bring to the table. EQ has had these opportunities to kind of show what he's capable of, hasn't exactly risen to the occasion quite yet. And I think if he doesn't show the ability to take a step forward this offseason, I think Green Bay goes in a different direction. So I think there's one spot potentially for those two players, unless injuries or other things affect the overall depth of the wide receiver position. Offensive line is interesting. I don't know that anyone's necessarily make or break, but maybe two lesser, not lesser knowns, but two guys that right now I think are on the outside looking in. That's Yosh Nijman and Jake Hansen. Yosh Nijman's had a couple seasons to kind of show what he's capable of. Again, he's a first guy off the bus sort of player, built like an absolute, chiseled out left tackle, but this is the opportunity where he needs to show, hey, I'm not just a developmental guy. If you need me, I can go in and play. And we know nothing about Yosh at this point. And getting a full preseason and things like that is going to be incredibly important for him. But if we start talking about all these offensive linemen that the Packers drafted, now Ben Braden's in the conversation, it just doesn't look great at the moment for Yosh Nijman. So him and then Jake Hansen, who showed up last year to training camp, I'm not disrespecting a player here. I think he has a lot of potential and he can still grow in this league. But when he showed up to training camp a season ago, he looked like a JV guy playing varsity football. Like, he just looked smaller than the rest of the offensive linemen, and he looked small for NFL standards. That doesn't mean the guy can't play. That doesn't mean he can't develop and can't get bigger and can't get stronger and can't get better. But Green Bay is not in the business of cutting draft picks almost ever. It's noteworthy that they released him as a 6th-round pick. I know it's just a 6th-round pick, but they released him as a 6th-round pick a season ago. He did stick around in the practice squad, got brought back later in the season, but I do think for those two players, this is going to be a very big offseason. Tight end, Jay Sternberger. And listen, tight ends take a little bit longer to develop. We know that. I still think Jay Sternberger has a ton of upside. And I do think that he could easily be a player that builds a really good rapport with Jordan Love. I'm sure those two were a lot of times in the same scout team a season ago. As a young quarterback, you want a tight end you can relate with. I think that, Aaron Rodgers not being there might actually be a good thing for Jay Sternberger. And I think that maybe he could develop a rapport with Jordan Love a little bit. So this is a big offseason for him. Listen, if Jake Sternberger wasn't on this team and you said Green Bay went with Mercedes Lewis, Bob Tunyon, Dominique Daphne, and Josiah DeGuara, that wouldn't shock me one bit. And hopefully Green Bay gets something back from Sternberger for Sternberger in that scenario, but that's not an unheard of scenario. So I definitely think this is a really big offseason for Jay Sternberger. Linebacker Oren Burks, and I don't see it. He might make the team as like a special teams player still. They've now moved him back to the inside linebacker position. They've experimented with him. The thought with him coming out was, hey, in college, he was an edge rusher, a linebacker, and a safety. And if he can use the coverage skills from when he was a safety, with the tackling skills of when he was a linebacker, with the pass rush skills and blitz skills of when he was an edge rusher, we could have something really special at linebacker. Unfortunately, he's sort of I don't even know if you can say a jack of all trades. It's just that he hasn't done any of them well. He hasn't been a good pass rusher. He hasn't been a good overall tackler and inside linebacker, and he hasn't shown well in coverage. He's been okay on special teams, but he's going to have to be more than that. He was a 3rd-round pick, top 100 pick. It's a now or never moment for Oren Burks. At corner, you can say almost the exact same thing for Josh Jackson. Top 100 draft pick, 2nd-round selection, has had opportunities. They've tried him at safety. They've tried him at outside corner. They've tried him at inside corner. They've tried him in man. They've tried him in zone, and nothing is stuck up until this point. I do think this defense could be a potential fit for Josh Jackson, but again, it is a now or never moment for him. Kadar Holloman, same thing, and even to a lesser extent, I think KB Anento. And again, you guys know probably by now, KB Anento is definitely a guy that I have my eye on and I really like, but right now he's kind of in that Raven Green mold where he's just been far too injured over his first 2 seasons, and it is insanely hard to make it as an undrafted free agent. It is so much harder when you have consistent injuries that are piling up to set you behind the 8 ball, because you need to almost be flawless to impress as an undrafted guy to make a roster. And injuries just derail you so much. So he had the injury in his first training camp, comes back next year, makes the team, has the injury, and doesn't get to play all season long. I still really like him as a prospect, but this is one of those off seasons where have to have a big offseason, have to outperform the Kadar Hallmans, the Stanford Samuels, the Josh Jacksons if you want to make this team And of course, you have to stay healthy. So Jackson, Hallman, and Ento all at corner, all make or break off seasons. Safety, Will Redmond. And, this is a former third-round draft pick who battled injuries. He's kind of stuck around. It seems just based on the first couple OTAs that Green Bay has a spot for him in their defense, potentially in some nickel and dime situations. Do with that as you may. Again, mileage may vary on how you feel about that. But there were moments last season when he was in on defense where it looked like you thought maybe he could hang in this league. But for the most part, when he was on the field, he was the weak part of the Packers defense. And again, that's not to rag on the guy. It's not to say he's not a good football player. He is, and he's one of the Packers' core special teams players. And that's there's a ton of value in that. But Will Redmond's getting snaps in the nickel and dime defenses to start this offseason in OTAs. Now, there's players not there. Jair Alexander's not practicing. That could kind of put everything else in flux. But it seems that Will Redmond has an opportunity to earn a spot on this defense. And if he does, he has to make the most of it. And if he doesn't, it could be, a thing where they go with a Henry Black and a Vernon Scott and some of the younger safeties rather than a Will Redmond. And I think from a special team standpoint, he probably makes the team. But if he ever wants to be more than just a special teams guy, it's probably now or never for Will Redmond. And then last but not least, two guys on the special teams, J.K. Scott, Hunter Bradley. New special teams coach Maurice Drayton's basically said their backs are against the wall. They need to perform better. There's competition for both of them on the roster. Listen, if J.K. Scott can't show consistency, you have to go in another direction. If Hunter Bradley can't show consistency, you have to go in another direction. And, you can't go backwards, of course. You can't get worse players. But whether it's now or maybe they keep them on the roster until they can find something better, and maybe that lasts through the season. But if they can't start showing some level of consistency, the end is soon for both of those players. So those are my players that I think are ultimately in make or break seasons. Just to recap: Dexter Williams, Devin Funchess, EQ, Josh Nijman, Jake Hansen, Jay Sternberger, Oren Burks, Josh Jackson, Kadar Hallman, KB Anento, Will Redmond, J.K. Scott, and Hunter Bradley. So definitely a decent amount of players, but that's the type of Green Bay depth that Green Bay has on this roster right now. And there's a lot of competition, which is a really great thing, a lot of young talent, and I think some of these players are going to have to go out and earn their jobs this coming offseason. That's obviously started with OTAs, but ramps up even now that we're in the mandatory minicamp portion of the offseason. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe. I'll be right back here tomorrow breaking down news from Tuesday's mandatory minicamp. Make sure to check out today's audio podcast wherever you get your favorite podcasts. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.